community relations of the Dolphin program. I want to talk to you about specifically, because he told me I'm on a very short leash, what I'm about to present tonight. The word icon comes from ancient Greek. It is, when applied to a person as opposed to a building, someone worthy of great respect, of high honor, of tall praise, of actual veneration. This year's SAVE honoree says we met in 1982 at a political event in North Miami. I don't remember that because I was running campaigns and he was just getting started in his life. I do remember meeting him later that year when he did the grunt work that actually elected a person as state representative. His guy went to Tallahassee and Steve went to Aventura Mall and worked in sales. We met again later that year when he was a journalist, well actually several years later, when he was a journalism major in my department at FIU. At that point I was transitioning from being a professor to being a professional in the real world, and one of my first assignments was to run a Greater Miami Chamber infrastructure campaign for transportation. So I hired this young man who I had re-met at the university to do the grunt work for that campaign. And this individual came to the chamber headquarters and worked for one day and disappeared, not to be seen again. So we didn't talk for a few years. Then in 1985, he moved in and took over my life, moved into our apartment and changed my life entirely. Later that same year, he began working at the police desk at the Miami Herald. An unusual place to start. It was out in the recesses. It wasn't even in the newsroom. And then he broke a story and he jumped right into the newsroom and never stopped. And as you know, the rest of the story of what he accomplished at the Miami Herald, I won't repeat what's been said before, but you know that story. So tonight, please rise to honor my husband, SAVE's 2019 Equality Icon, Steve Rothaus.
Thank you all very much, and thank you to my husband. Well, we're together for 34 years, and we're married for 5. Thank you for the introduction. You know, I must say that Rick and I have had a very interesting 34 years. As you can imagine, that when I first met Rick, he was involved in politics, and he was lobbying in Tallahassee. The first year that we were together, he was lobbying, and he said, you know, I really don't like going to Tallahassee for a couple of months, so he stopped. And he concentrated on work here in Miami-Dade County. And just a couple of things that I think that should be said. There was an organization that preceded SAVE, which was Dade Action PAC. And I saw Mayor Dan Gelber here tonight. Well, there was a previous Mayor Gelber, as many of you know, Mayor Cy Gelber. And Rick ran Cy Gelber's campaign for mayor. And within the first year of Mayor Gelber winning the election, Dade Action PAC, Rick, they lobbied for that human rights ordinance that passed on the beach in 1992 or 3. So I just, want to say that. And also I see Mayor Alex Pinellas here. Rick was Mayor Pinellas' campaign spokesman throughout the late 90s, early 2000s, which was also a very interesting time for me because at that time, in addition to covering LGBT, I was also the Metro layout editor, which very few people knew, for the Miami Herald. So I would lay out the section every night, and of course Mayor Pinellas was in the paper every day. So to avoid a conflict of interest, every night when it came time to lay out the story involving Mayor Pinellas, one of my coworkers would get up from his desk, come over to my desk, and he would look at the layout, and he said, okay, I want you to put Alex Pinellas' picture here. And he'd walk back to his desk. This happened night after night after night. I'm very fortunate tonight. I've got 3 of my 4 nephews here. We have Mark, we have Zachary, we have Ethan. Mark is the oldest of the 3, and Rick and I have been together 9 years longer than Mark has been on Earth. So these guys grew up, with the 2 of us, and that's something that's important to, just know that, we've been family for 34 years. My mother is here also, Barbara Rothaus. She's attended all of these events, and I'm always very fortunate to know that she's here. The other day she asked me on the phone, she said, what kind of an award are you getting? I said, it's the Icon Award. She said, pause, and she said, Icon Award? She said, they give that to old people. Then she said, well, what does that make me? It's interesting, getting older in our community is a luxury, and it's something that we should embrace. It's something we should all think about, because most of us in this room have known of people who didn't have that luxury. Whether you were a man in the 80s who contracted HIV and died in his 30s or 40s, or whether you're a trans brother or sister who had, killed in your 20s or 30s, or, the teenager who took, his or her own life. That getting older is a luxury that we should all appreciate. In 2006, I began taking my camera to events. I would go to proms and protests, pool parties and pride parades. As a way to document and engage our communities, I began creating these photo galleries, first for the Herald and later for Facebook. From the beginning, I carefully filed and backed up all of my photos, chronologically 1 folder per event. Well, about 2 weeks ago, after going to the Art Center to the community dance, I was curious, knowing for tonight I needed to do a little research. I wondered how many files and how many photos did I have? Well, since 2006, I've archived folders from 863 events, containing a total of 27,540 photos. Now, you may not believe this, but about 900 of those photos are of Tony Lima. It's true. I joined the Herald in 1985. My professional turning point came 12 years later, the summer that gay fashion icon Gianni Versace was slain on the steps of his Ocean Drive mansion. And realizing that we had no one on staff covering South Florida's growing LGBT community, editors asked me to take the assignment. And I said yes, with one condition: that the stories needed to run everywhere in the Herald circulation area, not just zoned to sections like Miami Beach neighbors. My editors agreed. Originally, these stories ran in a bi-weekly column that we called Outlooks. And reporter Johnny Diaz from the Sun Sentinel, he's here tonight, and Johnny helped contribute to several of those stories back then. As our coverage increased, the community responded, and not just positively. Some conservatives demanded that the publishers Dave Lawrence and Alberto Ibargüen fire me and kill the beat. Both men refused. Around that time, one of my coworkers told me it was okay for me to be out as a reporter, but I would never be promoted to upper management. But years later, as the 2008 recession hit and the Herald began laying off reporters and editors, a senior manager told me, "Keep doing what you're doing, it's your value." Eventually, our world changed, and I like to think that my work at the Herald helped make that happen. In 2016, the Columbia Journalism Review published an article titled "How the Miami Herald's Steve Rothaus Became an LGBT Pioneer in Mainstream Journalism." Elizabeth Schwartz was quoted in the article. Quote, "Not only does he tell our stories, he gives us access to the broader world and gives the broader world access to us." Now, when I launched my beat 22 years ago, it was with the hope that it would be a model for newsrooms across the nation. But as the mainstream journalism business began to collapse, in the digital era of social media, that would not happen. The old business model is broken. Now, newspapers and TV stations can barely cover essential local beats such as transportation, taxes, and City Hall. Staff arts coverage is gone, as is most features reporting. The challenge for all of us, all news consumers and newsmakers, is to find new ways of messaging. Perhaps the most effective solution is also the most basic. Get out of our digital comfort zones and have real one-on-one conversations with all kinds of people we meet in our everyday lives. You know, the kind of door-to-door canvassing that SAVE has done so successfully in the recent past. That is exactly the strategy that has brought us all here together tonight. Mixing with allied civic leaders, politicians, and the Miami Dolphins here at Hard Rock Stadium. Thank you all very much, and good night.
So now we've come to the end of our program.